Oh, there we are.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you well. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, this is exciting.
Yeah,
Have you ever been on Instagram Live before?
I have not. No.
Okay, so this is your first time.
This is my first time.
Well, I'm excited for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Why don't we start by you just introducing yourself
Sure.
and kind of what you do?
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. So my name is Andrew Peterson. I'm the secretary of the ID8 Oregon branch. And in the past, I used to be a fourth grade tutor. And in the last 5, maybe going on 6 years now, I've really started a big interest and a new passion in the field of helping students that have dyslexia.
So, okay, before we get into it,
Yeah.
you have a really cool job too.
Oh,
Why don't you just share a little bit or what you're comfortable sharing about
sure. Yeah.
your other
So,
job?
so are you talking about having a 3-year-old son? That job?
Yeah, you got that job. So,
Yeah. So that's the number one job, being a dad for a 3.5-year-old, almost 4-year-old son, and have a wonderful wife too. And I also have worked for United Airlines for 21 years now as well.
it's incredible,
Yeah.
man. That's
Yeah.
so awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, as we dive into your story, what brought you into the world of dyslexia and education? Can
Yeah.
you can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was in 2014. I was working with a student who was in 7th grade. I was tutoring him. And when I first started working with him, one of the things I wanted to do was get a baseline for his reading ability. And he's a very smart kid, top 1-2% of students I've ever worked with. And when I assessed him, his comprehension level was like a freshman in college, and he was only in 7th grade at the time. But his oral reading ability was only like in 2nd or 3rd grade, and I was flummoxed. I just had no idea like what was going on here. And he was very bright. He was trying really hard. It wasn't like he wasn't giving his a good effort. And his mom said that one of his previous teachers had told her that she thought he might be dyslexic. And I said, "Oh, okay."
Did you know what dyslexia meant when she said that?
I had probably the same idea as the general public of what dyslexia is. So at the time I thought, oh, well, that's when some students see letters backwards, or maybe what helps them are like special glasses or a blue overlay. And that was about it. Now, this was only a few years after having gone through a master's program for childhood education. So I thought, well, maybe there was something I missed. So I went back to all of my textbooks that I had kept from my graduate studies, and there was one paragraph about this long that talked
Okay,
about.
wait. How many pages are in that book?
Oh, there's quite a few. I mean, I went through every single book, and
Okay, fair.
there was like one paragraph there. So I said, okay, I got a little learning to do here. So I picked up a book that I consider kind of like my number one go-to book for anybody that's just learning about dyslexia, and that's called Overcoming Dyslexia by Dr. Shaywitz and her husband.
Okay.
And at the time, I was really naive. I thought, well, gosh, now that I have this book, I'm probably the only person in Portland that knows anything about dyslexia, right? Because I finished school a couple of years ago, and we never talked about it. So surely this is like some kind of unicorn out in the wild.
And you'd never seen anything like this in the classroom from a student or...
Well, so yes and no. In retrospect, yeah, I had seen some signs.
Okay.
But I think the issue with this particular student was that the disparity between his oral reading ability and his comprehension, you go from like 2nd or 3rd grade to a college freshman ability. I mean, that's like 10 years difference. So
Okay.
it wasn't an issue of like, okay, yeah, they're in 7th grade, but they're reading at an 8th grade ability, but they're decoding at a 6th grade ability. I mean, that's, it's a little wishy-washy, if you will. It's, it's kind of close enough to the norm. But this clearly was not a norm. Something was awry here. So to answer your question, when I had thought back of other students, I'm like, oh,
So the
yeah.
dots are starting to connect
The
from
dots started connecting. Yeah.
there. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So what's really cool about this, I think, and is you jumped on it, right? Like you dove
Yeah.
into like trying to figure
Yeah.
it out. Like this
Yeah.
Rubik's Cube of like, wait, what is going on with these students?
I was kind of in an existential crisis here when it comes to pedagogy, because I was like, what is going on here? And when I learned that it affected so much more of the population than what I was aware of, that really, it lit a fire for me.
Yeah, I wanted to ask what drove you so much to like dive into it? Because we see things all the time in our
Yeah,
in our world. There's
right.
things coming at us all the time where it's kind of like, oh, that happened, and we ignore it or we don't really pay attention to it. But something pulled at you, and I was wondering if you identified what that was. Or
Sure. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think a lot of it is it's kind of therapy for myself in a way, because now that I have the advantage of being able to look back in time and kind of be reflective on my teaching practices previously, I can say, what I did then, I was doing to the best of my ability,
for sure,
but what I was doing now that I know better was wrong. So
that's a pretty big judgment to have on yourself to
yeah,
say
well,
wrong.
it is, and and I think it's important to recognize that when as others say, when you know better, you do better. When you recognize that the way that you were teaching, even though it was the way that was taught, is not the right way for many students, I really took it upon myself to say, okay, I have to, kind of cleanse those sins in a way, because it's, I can't go back in time and fix the way that I taught those students, but if I can share what I know with others, I think it's a good way of repeating mistakes that have been made, not just personal mistakes, but mistakes in education in the past.
Wow, it's powerful stuff right there.
Yeah.
If you are joining us, we are with the International Dyslexia Association Oregon branch, talking to Andrew, board member, doing a lot of positive things within the dyslexia community. I want you to talk about something that you've obviously done a lot of self-discovery on, but for teachers on the line that might be wondering, hey, how do I identify these students, or what things can I be looking for? What advice would you have for them?
Sure. And I guess I'm happy if they're already at that step. I think a lot of teachers haven't even gotten that far yet, because when I mention dyslexia to students or to teachers that are actively teaching now, a common response that I'll get is, yeah, my kids don't have that. Or my kids, I teach in a Title I school. That's my biggest problem. Or I have a lot of English language learners. That's my number one problem. And my response to that is, yeah, those are some challenges. But this is something that's going to broadly affect up to about 20% of the population to some extent or another. And I'm always mindful to tell people that dyslexia, it's a spectrum. So if you think of a bell curve, we can think of dyslexia as kind of the tail end of that natural reading ability. So if we can get teachers to that point to understand, yeah, this is pretty common. And yes, I do have some students in my classroom. The International Dyslexia Association, both at the national and at the state level, have wonderful programs, especially now with the quarantine going on. There are so many free or low-cost webinars to take advantage of. Sally Shaywitz's book is phenomenal if you want to kind of dip your toes into the field of dyslexia. Mark Seidenberg, who is from UW-Madison, was last year's keynote speaker at the IDA National Conference. it's a wonderful, wonderful place to start if you just want to kind of make those initial first steps.
Definitely. And so many good resources. If you're on the line, you have questions or you want to get more information from us, please go to the International Dyslexia Association Oregon branch page. There's plenty of resources for teachers and parents. And then you can always email us. We can give you the titles of these books that Andrew's recommending. So what did you see any corrective steps? Like once you identified dyslexia within the student, what happened next?
Yeah, so what happened next is I first realized that there was a lot I didn't know. In order to help this student, I had to go through some additional training myself. So I actually went down to Florida and took a course down in Central Florida called the NOW program. And that really exposed me of the core phonological difficulties that a lot of students have. So before you even get to the reading, it's just the processing of the sounds and how do you help somebody that has phonological processing difficulties move on to reading. So for example, we had one of my classmates was a retired English teacher, and I'll never forget this. She was probably in her 70s, and one of the tasks that we were doing is separating phonemes or separating sounds and manipulating the sounds in the words. So I think one of the words was, say the word cat, now flip the k with the t sound. So you go from cat to tack. And the amount of mental effort that she was spending on this task, which for me as someone who's non-dyslexic, I could have done it in like, a millisecond, but she was really struggling with it. And it really opened my eyes like, okay, here's an educated woman who taught English her whole life, and she's struggling with this task. It really made a profound impact on me, like how much patience I need to have with younger students that are just going through initial remediation programs.
Something that's really eye-opening is we do these simulations through the Oregon branch, and you see teachers go through these various exercises or what it might be like to experience some symptoms of dyslexia.
Right.
And, the 20 minutes that they're doing the drill, that the social emotional impact that it has on them is really eye-opening, I think, for them. And then for the students who are actually experiencing it, to see teachers go through that, I think it makes it recognize like how hard they are actually working in the classroom and how much that doesn't get necessarily identified. So
absolutely. And then especially when you put in some of the maybe not so good teaching strategies that we've either been taught or we picked up through the years, it can really cause a lot of social emotional damage to students. So, and I think one of the things that we're on the right track. We got a lot of progress to go in the Pacific Northwest and Washington, Oregon, is really screening these students early rather than waiting until 4th grade.
Yeah.
And now all those years of opportunity for remediation and intervention have passed. Now it's just going to become that much more difficult, and you have to deal with that much more in the self-esteem department to kind of boost up your confidence and boost up the willingness to engage with literacy.
I run a lot, and there's an analogy that I use. It's like, so sometimes when you're running a long time and you have your pack on and it's like rubbing and you like ignore it, right? Like it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Well, then like a long period down the road, you start to see scrapes or blistering, and it's like if you would have just stopped for that millisecond, fixed the pack, you eliminate that. And I see a lot of similarities in, if we can get that early pre-K, 3rd grade remediation, identification, we're saving those students huge blocks of time, and we're putting them in position to be successful down the road. Yeah. So I'm all about what you're talking about. I think it's so inspiring.
Yeah, I think successful both emotionally and academically as well.
Yeah. We have a question on the line. I work with students in special ed math classes. Do people have issues with numbers as well as text?
Yeah,
And thank you for that.
yeah. So one of the things, again, looking retrospectively at some of my students, I kind of like to say that dyslexia, it's kind of like peanut butter. It likes to go with a lot of different things. Um, peanut butter and jelly, peanut butter this. Dyslexia really likes to make friends with what we call other disabilities or atypical neural issues. ADHD is one, dyscalculia or dyscalculia is another one. So what I've personally noticed is my students who are older and they're still using their fingers to count or multiply, those are my students that were also having reading difficulties.
And for the people on the line that don't know what dyscalculia is, how would you maybe in a
Yeah,
sentence?
it's kind of the math equivalent of dyslexia, where you're having difficulties working with numbers or with mathematics.
So I have a question for you, because
Yeah.
as you're working with students, what advice would you have for them as they're kind of either going through it, maybe they got picked up late? What have you seen that?
Yeah. I think it depends on the age of the student and then also um, how are they doing emotionally? Because if the emotional part is not fixed first, the rest is really, really difficult. I think you have to work on that emotional part first. So me personally, I like to do kind of like what I call like talk therapy to help
Mhm.
them through some of their struggles. So that's kind of, we'll take care of the literacy a little bit later, but let's talk about what's going on and talk about how there's a lot of people in the world that are that do have dyslexia and they are successful. And just because you have difficulties with this does not mean that this is going to be a roadblock. It's going to be a
Right.
hurdle. It's going to be a hurdle for you, but it's not a roadblock. And kind of once that's addressed, then, also talking about assistive technology to help them as
Sure.
well. So I think it kind of needs to be tailored based on specific students' experiences.
So if you're just joining, we're with the International Dyslexia Association Oregon branch. We're talking to Andrew, who's a board member, who's a teacher, who's done multiple jobs and raising a kid right now. It's pretty impressive. And I think you hit on a key point. It's that self-confidence, it's that self-esteem, that if we can get that right with the students,
Yeah.
then you can go tackle some of the harder things, or maybe some of the things that might be challenging because you've built that up. So I totally believe in that, building up from the core. If you have questions, please reach out to us. If you want resources, reading material, please email us at the International Dyslexia Association Oregon branch. We're always happy to help, provide whatever knowledge we can. Andrew has listed a few books in this talk tonight, and we have those resources on our website as well. So the rule of the show is you get the last word. And you can talk, if you're talking to students or parents or teachers or whatever message you have for the community. Love to hear your final thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. One thing that I think it's really important that people know is I just kind of rhetorically ask, do you know what the connection is between dyslexia and intelligence? And, people think about it and they get different answers. And my answer is there's no connection whatsoever. You could literally be, and I say this with all sincerity, the smartest person on the face of the earth and still be dyslexic, right? And I think that so many kids think that they kind of start having negative self-thoughts about themselves, like, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I can't do this. And, nothing really could be farther from the truth. It's just that the way that their brain was developed or wired just was not conducive for reading. And we learn to speak as children. That comes very naturally, but reading is something that has to be explicitly taught. And for some of us, for myself, it came quite easily as a child. But that's not the case for a lot of students. So it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort, and maybe it's not going to be the easiest thing that you can do in the world, but that's okay. That's okay.
That is a great message. Andrew, we appreciate you taking the time on a Monday night to join us. Really appreciate all the work you're doing for the community, and wish you a great evening.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.